important part of that, Larry Oetker, that's going to talk to us today. And we know there's a lot of moving parts of this, whether it's the wastewater there, or the development of the town of Samoa, and what type of development in the industries that we can attract and want to attract. So Larry's going to give us some updates on some of the potentially really exciting things that are happening, whether it be wind farm or fish farming, and things that we might find appropriate and advantage economically to the accruing to our area. So Larry, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate you letting me start a little bit earlier. I can be pretty long-winded. I like to talk a lot, and so we also have a lot to talk about, so that's what I like to think about. And so really kind of the topic that this group I think has been working on for a long time is how do we reestablish Humboldt Bay as a port of regional and national significance? That's really is the core question, is that we are a significant port, and then how do we accomplish this thing that you guys are meeting on? Marion told me that you had like 60-some meetings, 68 meetings that you've had so far, on this topic. And the work that you guys have been doing is really helping to lay the groundwork in this educational system that we have. And so I really encourage you to keep it up. And so I'm going to kind of go through these fairly quickly here. And so basically, Humboldt Bay is the second largest bay in the state of California. Is that most people, we don't look at that, but we're the second largest bay. We're bigger than San Diego Bay, not quite as big as San Francisco Bay. And so we're hugely important in the area. They're not going to create any new bays, and they're certainly not going to get any permits for any new industrial developments in areas that aren't already ports. So we all know that in the 90s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, this is what, the Samoa Peninsula looked like, and more. Just at the pulp mill that the Harbor District currently has, there's 2,000 trucks a day that went there. Thousands of people employed. This was a port of major significance to this area, and hugely important to the people that worked in the economy. So how do we bring it back? We all know that the decline of the timber industry and the crash of the housing market completely upset the cart, and we've just never been able to recover since then. And so when you look at the Samoa Peninsula, as a whole, I kind of look at this and look at the scale of this thing. What are we talking about? When Dan was the city manager of Arcata, on the council, mayor, all those things, I looked at, when I was in Arcata, the Alder Grove Industrial Park. What the Alder Grove Industrial Park did for us. It just is a small portion. If you look at the Eureka waterfront on the side, when you basically turn the corner at Broadway and you go all the way down to the Bayshore Mall, that's not even as big as the Samoa Peninsula industrial properties. When you put it into context of how much property do we have and how much underutilized property that we have available, drive down Broadway. When you turn the corner and go down to Pearson's and you go all the way from the bay, that whole commercial area, we're bigger than that. We have more land than that's available. And so, as been mentioned before, the Coastal Act says that we're supposed to modernize. It specifically says Humboldt Bay is a port in the national maritime economy, and that we're supposed to modernize. It says specifically, we are supposed to modernize. And so really it's this core question. The Coastal Commission is saying we're supposed to modernize. Do we want to modernize ourselves? And as a community, do we say that we want to become a modern port and that we want to invest in our infrastructure and that we're going to do this? And this is really, I think, the starting point of this key question. You have to say to yourself as a community that we want to do this. And the next kind of question that comes into play is, do we have the political will to chart our course and prepare our port for modern, clean, green, and sustainable industries? Do we have the political will to do that? And we saw with the wind energy, the land-based wind energy projects, and some of the other projects that have come forward in the past, that It wasn't the Coastal Commission that killed it. It wasn't other agencies that do those, and I'm not being against anything. I'm just saying is that we control our own destiny and we make these decisions ourselves. We can't blame other people for decisions that we make ourselves. Either we need to say that we're going to do this, or we should just stop. And this is kind of the point of where we're at now. Either we're going to do this, or we should just stop. Because we need to be in control of our own destiny and not have other people in control of our destiny. And so, in the last couple of months, we've been working with the County of Humboldt, the Harbor District, the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, the Humboldt Bay Municipal Water District, City of Eureka, and City of Arcata. We've been meeting on this topic in particular. How do we basically reinvest in the peninsula and revitalize it to support economic development? And so when you look at these, all these different agencies in the Samoa Peninsula, each one has different regulatory authority. The Water District has the industrial water line, the Community Service District is basically the fire lines, the water, all these different components. You know, the Harbor District is the port, the county does the permitting. If we were in Arcata or Eureka, you would go to one place and then they would handle all that stuff. In the Samoa Peninsula, we're disjointed and unorganized, and we're not aligned together. And so if we're going to pull this off, then all these agencies, we need to continue to work together and to operate as one unit to have prioritized goals and projects to move this thing forward. And so, as we've been talking about, we've identified some of these critical pieces of infrastructure that we need to upgrade and maintain. The industrial water line, the ocean outfall pipe from the small pulp mill, saltwater intake systems for our aquaculture industries, right-of-ways and utilities, the sewer main lines, water distribution lines, shoreline protection, they're starting to erode away. These things, we have to protect these. Create an energy island. Coastal development pre-permitting, so that our properties are pre-permitted when development wants to go in. Making our port a 12-month port, so that when the storms come in and we get shoaling, that we don't have draft restrictions so that Green Diamond can't get full ships out. We need to be a 12-month port. If you're going to attract business, our port has to be open 12 months a year. We can't be open for 6, 7, 8, 9 months. We have to be open 12 months. And then the jetty reconstruction. This year they're going to start rebuilding the jetties, up to $20 million reinvestment into improving our jetties. Those are frontline defenses. We need to get our core infrastructure together and always make sure that we have our navigation channel dredging, because if we don't have this core infrastructure, how can we be a port of regional and national significance? And so the plan is taking shape, and we're in implementation mode. We're not talking, we're beyond the talking point. We are in implementation mode. So basically, the town of Samoa, on your right, it has the approved master plan all the way from the Coastal Commission. You just look right out the door. There's development that's happening right over there. Just take a look. It's happening right now. This has been approved by the Coastal Commission, and it's in implementation mode for the county. The Nordic Aqua Farms project on the right, which is the pulp mill, just last week they submitted the pre-applications. We had a meeting with 22 different agencies where we went over. They have a timeline for when that project is coming in. It's real. Down on the right, there's a brand new multi-purpose dock. We applied for the Headwaters Fund. They're recommending approval that we move forward with the planning for building a brand new multi-purpose dock. These are real projects and things are moving forward. When we look at this, the town of Samoa, there's going to be a brand new wastewater treatment plant, brand new water tanks, water, gas, utilities, a new light industrial park, and they did the CDI zoning in that area. Then there's also a whole new, there's a wastewater treatment plant that is going to be built by November of 2020, this year, a brand new wastewater treatment plant, not thinking about it, not planning it, a brand new wastewater treatment plant. The permits before the Water Quality Control Board are already scheduled April 6th, I think it is, at the Water Board, to use the ocean outfall to discharge out. That's just for the town of Samoa. Then there's another environmental impact report that the county's already drafted, and it's all the main lines, all the lateral lines, literally from Fairhaven to connect to the new wastewater treatment plant to be expanded. There's already an environmental impact report that's drafted. And the water board had said that they would fund that improvements because they want to get those off of septic systems. So right away and land acquisitions, when this was all these 3 different property owners, that it was all private property. Now that they're starting to be sold off, we need to make sure that we're maintaining these right-of-ways and public access easements. When we're putting in these sewer main lines, do we have all the utility corridors? Can we put in the infrastructure? Can we put this infrastructure in when the private sector comes and says, I want to build my buildings, then it has to be public infrastructure that they're connecting into. And if we don't have the right-of-ways, this core basic stuff, then how are we going to supply the services that the industry needs? And so the water district, the short term, they need about $1.2 million to upgrade the existing water lines because they haven't been used in a long time. And just to maintain the pumps and the valves and all those things for the main industrial water line, for the aquaculture industries and other things that we're working with to develop. The ocean outfall pipe, we are actively using that. DG Fairhaven is in there. These are the different users that we're projecting, about 9.1 million gallons of discharge out the ocean outfall. Within the next couple of years, there'll be approximately 10 million gallons of water that's discharged out the outfall from these sources. We just did 2 500,000 gallon plus tests. We had divers go out to do the dive inspections, putting the anodes on the joints, all of these things. It's real. We're using it. These are the people that are using our ocean outfall. 30 million gallon capacity. We have another 20 million gallons that we could attract additional Nordic Aqua Farms type projects and other things. We have the capacity, we have the infrastructure to do this. And so dredge material reuse. Little side note, 600,000 that the Army Corps of Engineers take sand, out of the entrance every year, 600,000 cubic yards. That equates to basically 90 football fields, 6 foot deep, 100 feet wide, 300 feet wide, 6 feet deep, 90 football fields every year. The reason why that's significant is because in the worst case scenario, that's sea level rise that they're projecting, sea level rise. And in the maps, we need to protect our core industrial, coastal dependent industrial lands from potential sea level rise inundations. And all of this dredge material, it's valuable for us for sea level rise protection, shoreline, building up these areas so that we're prepared for the long game, our ports. So the navigation channels, we monitor these navigation channels, the surveys with the Army Corps of Engineers, always working with them to keep our navigation channels open so that when we build these docks, it's critical that they stay at the depths so that we remain a 12-month port. And so when we look at the Port of Humboldt and say, well, what do we have to offer? And if you just look at basically what I would consider half of the peninsula, which is from the pulp mill to the bridge, we have a 7-acre dock, another 1,100-acre dock, over 160 acres of coastal dependent industrial law property, warehouse space, all of these different things that we already have. The aquaculture industry, this is off our existing Redwood Marine Terminal 2. When they invest there, they use upland areas and they lease the upland areas from us. In the waters, we already have these 3 pre-permitted sites. Within that the Headwaters Fund granted us to start this out. We currently have 4 leases executed, 3 additional ones that are pending. I was just talking to one of my staff today, and we're looking at expanding these areas because these aquaculture operations, they need land-based operations to go with them, and really expanding the in-water aquaculture and the land-based aquaculture as well. The Nordic Aqua Farms, again, 600,000, 400 million investment. This is what the preliminary plans look like, basically taking down the big smokestack, the big tall buildings. There's a phase 1 and a phase 2, essentially everything in the back. And what that will mean is all brand new infrastructure at the pulp mill. When they come in, everything will be taken out, all modern, brand new infrastructure. And with the brand new infrastructure that's being put on here with the town of Samoa, we need to connect the two together in coherent planning with right-of-ways, acquisitions, the infrastructure so when development comes, that we can connect into those. The wood chip industry is vitally important to us. Historically, the shipping industry has been basically three-tiered. There was three legs to the shipping industry historically. It was basically the pulp mills, it was the chip export facility, and the fuel. Right now, we're operating basically on a two-legged stool. I look at it, we've got the chip industry and we've got the fuel industry. Those two industries are holding steady. Essentially the same, roughly about the same commodities as we historically had. You know, they're operating roughly at those same levels. We need to find replacements for that third leg of the stool, and maybe even have it a four-legged stool or a fifth-legged stool. Get additional commodities that come in here and really keep our port going. We've looked at basically the historic shipping levels and what, if these different industries come online, then how many ships that would mean, and what that means to us. Then you have longshoremen that are working. You have the bar pilots. You have the stevedores, you have all of these other people that are working in this maritime economy that we need to get back employed and to create that, because they're the backbone of our coastal dependent industries and how we're going to make this thing work. The skilled employees are critical for us. So broadband opportunities. You know, right now, the Highway 299 is, it's in progress. Basically, the California Public Utilities Commission has awarded $47 million, that's a grant, $47 million to bring broadband to low-income communities. The environmental document was submitted. You know, they're anticipating that brand new broadband will come from I-5 on the 299 corridor to Arcata, Eureka, and the Samoa Peninsula. What this means is that we have broadband opportunities. Really, the Googles of the world, companies like that, Facebook, the cloud. Anytime you look on the TV set and somebody says, you know, hey, the cloud, this is what it is. It's a data center. And so we're at this hub and this node now, and so these companies are going to become knocking in Eureka, Arcata, and the Samoa Peninsula, and going to want to do broadband telecommunication here. So the wind. You know, it's right offshore, basically, you know, 14,000 jobs. You know, there's been all kinds of studies that the state has done and BOEM, and said, look, we're it. Humboldt Bay is it. Not only is it 30 miles off our shore, we don't have any overhead, we're a deep draft port, we have tons of vacant land, we're ready. Shots Energy Lab is doing a $750,000 study that looks at the transmission, basically a good, huge task is on the port infrastructure. They've already scheduled the public hearing, or a day-long meeting that they're going to have on the offshore wind industry, and all their consultants are going to come in April. And so we're meeting again with them this Friday to look at the plans. They have looked at the wind industry, and their consultants, Mott McDonald, who's the engineering firm, specifically looked at the RMT1 dock and what it would mean, and developed different development scenarios between just an assembly operation, a production area, and other things. How much land and what would the systems look like? Those will be released in April and are critical to what we're looking for. And so, like I said, the new multi-purpose dock is RMT1, which is literally just right down the hill. You know, 7-acre dock, it's in horrible shape, horrible shape. At this point, we're just really questioning whether we can have fishermen go on there. We've had forklifts go through the dock. It's falling apart. If we don't fix it now, it's going to be past the point of no return. In the 1990s, they did an environmental impact report to basically completely rebuild that dock. And so to completely rebuild that dock. And so what would this sort of look like if they rebuild this dock and we attract the wind energy? Because basically they put a big crane on the end of the dock. It would have all the materials, the assembly, the other things down there. And then they would be doing sort of what you would call wet deployment. In other words, you build them on land. They probably do 2 of them side by side, where they would be building on tracks or a tire kind of a thing. And then they would they would deploy them in the water. You see the one that's in the water? When they're doing the final assembly and they're putting the tower on, big crane would basically assemble it in the water, and then they would tow them out the bay, fully upright, completely upright. That's really a critical point, because these are floating platforms. You cannot float that under the Golden Gate Bridge. It's too tall. You have the Coronado Bridge in San Diego. You have Coos Bay has bridges. All these major ports have bridges. We don't have bridges. We don't have overhead power lines. They can tow these out our bay. That's one of the core reasons why they're looking at us. And so, oh, you can't do this. Why would they do this? Is that, well, currently New Bedford, Massachusetts just built a new dock for offshore wind. Basically, the Port of Virginia just announced that they did a partnership. The industry just invested $20 million in new cranes just to do a offshore wind. You know, Brest, France, and Portugal, Belgium. In the last couple of years, this is a brand new industry, and it is happening right now. And Humboldt is prime for this. So basically, you know, you look at those ports. I say this is in Brest, France. That's what it looks like right now. It looks a lot like what we have right now. And so it's not like they have these existing facilities and then they're just going to move right in. This is almost what it looks like with us. It's vacant industrial property. They're going to build these facilities essentially from scratch and get them prepared for the industry. And this is what their conceptual idea is on the left, and what our new multi-purpose dock would look like that there was previously an environmental impact report on. And so growing this offshore wind energy cluster. What am I doing for time? So growing this offshore wind energy cluster. If we're going to do wind energy, what do we want to be? How big do we want it to be? Is a question that we need to ask ourselves. And so within the wind energy, there kind of is what's happening off of Humboldt, right? And so 30 miles off of Humboldt. We should be focused on that, and the Bureau of Offshore Energy Management in next spring will probably issue that lease. The question is, do we want to just supply the wind energy for that facility, or do we want to become a regional hub? And then there's two other ones off of the Central Coast that they want to build off of, but they don't have port facilities off of Morro Bay, and essentially the Diablo nuclear power plant's slated to close down, and they want to connect into the 2 gigawatts of power that used to do, and all that will be shut down, all the transmission lines will go into play. So what the industry has been talking to us about, well, hey, if we build Humboldt first, or we build this facility here, then we would be able to deploy them 30 miles offshore, but we'd also be able to build them in port and then tow them down to the Central Valley and deploy them off of Morro Bay and Diablo Canyon. And then in the future, when Coos Bay and other ports go in, if we become the regional hub, then we basically supply those areas to the other areas of deployment in the long term. And then there's also the operational maintenance and all the port deployments that go in that you have to repair and keep them up. And so the timelines, we looked at kind of the timeline. On the top is, you know, if BOEM issues the lease in 2021, then they're saying they have about 3 years of environmental review where they're looking at the birds and the whales and all of the things that they have to do for the environmental review. And then they would need the port in around 24, 25. So this is really is the heart of the soul of the question. Will we be ready in 24, 25 when the industry needs our port? There's a sense of urgency here. We can't wait a couple of years for the industry is going to pass us by and just say, you're not here. And so then down on the bottom, this is what we were looking at the headwaters and we're working at is how do we get ahead of this curve and have our port ready by 24, 25 so that they can use our port. And so we applied for the headwaters, you know, to start the technical studies, do that by the spring of 2021, then preparing the environmental impact reports and the permitting, and then get into the construction and development stage so that our port is ready for them to come in and this investment is what we're looking at. And so then this is just one example, like MARAD, there's the Springs. This is just last year. Port Humane, Long Beach, Oakland, Stockton, they applied for, you know, a $53 million project, $16 million, 18. These are specifically for port infrastructure that the federal government has to upgrade ports. And so this public-private partnership, we get our port ready, the old adage, you want to be shovel ready, so that when the industry comes and when the grants comes, then you can get the private industry to invest, like we showed in Virginia where they were investing in cranes and other things, and investing in our port infrastructure to get it all timed so that we can do this deployment. And so as I mentioned, the Harbor District, we asked for 65,000 for a 3-year commitment from the Headwaters Fund. I think we had a great reception from the Headwaters. I thought they really got it. I was actually very, very impressed with the meeting. I didn't really think they were going to get it, what we were trying to do. And so they said, look, we only have 1 year of funding, so you could come back additional years if you wanted to, but we were awarded 65,000. It still has to go to the Board of Supervisors to get approved. Then the Harbor District commits additional money. And so we're looking at getting this started with doing the technical reports and the planning work for this new multi-purpose dock right down here. Again, getting started right away, not waiting, starting soon. And then there's an additional Blue Economy Grant, 600,000, and they're specifically looking for new industries, new clusters in rural areas, and offshore wind is one of those clusters that they want to provide grant money for. And so we're looking at, do we apply for this $600,000 grant to augment some of the other local monies that we have to really get this going, and let's get this show on the road. And so the next couple of things I'm just going to, is more of I'm conceptual, I'm just thinking aloud, right? We're a small family, who's going to stay at the room, so basically, if you look at your tax dollars, right? So what happens is basically there's $1 of taxes. So you get new development comes in, there's new taxes. So it's still the same 1% tax. There's no new tax, it's just a 1% tax. And the tax gets split between all those different, segments. But basically, the county general fund gets like 16 cents on the dollar, and then county roads gets 2.2 cents. And most of it goes to the schools and other things. That's just where the money goes to. And so then one of the questions is, well, what would happen if basically we were able to reinvest sort of the future income, tax income that would come from future development? And just conceptually, in the roads, $74,000 a year, and then from the 16.1 cents, $547,000 a year. That would come from just the taxes from the new development. And so then you say, well, Larry, how'd you come up with that, right? I just blowing smoke. And I said, Dan taught me this when I was at Arcata, when I used to run the redevelopment agency. They used to call it tax increment financing. That's what this is. Pretty much every city, that's how people do it. This is what they do. They say, hey, we're going to have this development is going to come, and they're going to invest, and that's going to create property taxes, and that's how you do bonds and you do other investment, right? Is you're planning for future growth. But before the growth comes in, we have to have the infrastructure. So then you basically look at it and you say, hey, we have Redwood Marine Terminal 2. It has basically a $4 million value, right? We currently pay like $44,000 a year in taxes. The town of Samoa pays $10 million. The second they build that wastewater treatment plant, then they subdivide all these properties, and then you have 65 brand new individual homes, just like the town of Scotia. The assessed valuation just went up like that, immediately. And so then the Nordic Aqua Farms, if they do 400 million investment, I just put 200 million in there. Offshore wind with the multi-purpose dock. Then you have the assessed growth and the 1%, the growth in property taxes. And then the county share of that is the 541, and then the 0.22 from the roads is another 74,000. And so, I was just, last night I kind of put this together, I was just kind of curious and said, if you did that, how could you sort of pull these things off if you looked at this? And if I was in Arcata and Dan was the city manager, that's what I'd come to him. I'd say, geez, Dan, if we reinvested this money, we could, get this growth, and then once you do that initial investment, then you have that money for the next 30, 40 years. And so it's kind of the question that, and this is just one example, this is just something that I put together. There's a number of examples that I am really asking this group is to say, number one, back to the initial premise, which is, do we want to become a port of regional and national significance? This really is the first question. And then the second question is, do we have the political will and the sense of urgency to pull this off? And I think, the answer is historically it's been no. That's been the answer is we haven't. And so then the third real question is that if the answer is yes to those first two questions, then how are we going to pull this off, right? How are we going to pull this off? And from my perspective, and the perspective of the people that we're talking about, the sense of urgency is now. The wind energy isn't going to wait for us. If we go the traditional route, and we apply for grant money, and we do that, it takes a long time to get grant money. It's unpredictable. It just won't work if we go that pathway. And so we're going to have to look internally for some of these areas and some of the prioritization. And so that's kind of my spiel. And so I'm going to leave it at that. And I hope I've left you with a few nuggets to think about. But I guess in conclusion is the pathway is pretty set. The pathway is set. We're well on the way. These things are happening now. You know, with my board, what we've been talking about is we want to get out of the discussion mode and into the implementation mode. And that's where we're at. We're implementing. On the dredging, on some of these projects, we've been very fortunate to have the private sector coming to us and saying they want to invest in our community. And it really is the question for us is, do we want the private sector to invest in our community and revitalize our community? And I think the timing is now, and the opportunities are absolutely here if we work as a community to try to solve these problems. Thank you.
Larry, would you roll back to that last slide? I would like to grab a snap of that, please.
Perhaps you could,
That looks good to me.
I just did that last night, so don't
perhaps you could provide that by email to me, and we can put it on the email of your whole presentation, if that's acceptable.
Sure.
We'll have some questions now, and I have one to start it off. The real elephant in the room to the dredging issue is how to get the spoils redefined so that they can be used. Because other areas of California have been able to do that. How do we do it, and what might we be doing to achieve that?
Yeah, it's been a huge issue, and so great timing is the Harbor District sent a letter to the Water Quality Control Board because basically when you dredge, they consider it just like hazardous waste. Even though we take all the samples, everything, document contamination, they call it spoils. It's treated as a waste material. We sent a letter to the board. The board responded and said they want to meet with us when they come up here for the meeting in April. My board's going to discuss this tomorrow night at their meeting. It's a huge issue for us because we need to use our dredge material. We need to stick it in the Samoa Lagoons property and for sea level rise inundation. And what they require is basically that we put a plastic liner underneath it, which is like acres and acres and acres of plastic in the first place. And then it creates big runoff problems because then the water doesn't naturally flow down and you have to control all the runoff. And so we've asked them specifically to do a couple of things. Number one, we asked them to designate the groundwater under the coastal dependent industrial properties to aquaculture and industrial instead of domestic drinking water. That was the first request. This is a coastal dependent industrial properties. The water underneath there shouldn't be used for domestic drinking water sources, which they haven't designated. It should be for aquaculture and industrial purposes. The second thing is we asked them specifically to change the designation from basically a waste or a hazardous material and put it into just a standard classification, just like they would any other material. Okay, thank you very much.
Hey, Larry, I'm so sorry. Did you mention a timing for that as far as when that might be considered? For April?
The Water Quality Control Board, we're going to meet with them on April, and then it depends upon if there's a code amendment that they have to do. They have basically every 3 years they do a code amendment, and so it would be, they'd be working on it within, it's actually set for, I think, next year is the time period that they're supposed to update the code, because last time it was updated was a couple of years ago.
How might we be changing the code classifications of the land around the bay as we move forward?
In meaning out of coastal dependent industrial?
Or augmenting those adjacent to.
You know, when I kind of started my thought process on the peninsula in, I think I have something there. Anyway, in the first place, I don't think we should change the coastal dependent industrial. I think you have to look at it and say, oh my God, that's the greatest thing since peanut butter. I would never change it. With the Coastal Act, what it says is we can fill wetlands. What it says is the highest priority use in the whole thing. Basically, it has a higher priority than coastal access or any other thing. We need that designation in order to get these projects through. The second thing is if you think about it from a zoning standpoint, we're going to put in a brand new sewer line. It's going to go right on Vance Avenue. The narrow band all the way along Vance Avenue from the town of Samoa to the Samoa Peninsula, that needs to be downzoned from coastal dependent industrial to light industrial. Because what you want to do, if you're a private developer, you got water, sewer, power, fire hydrants right there, that's where you want all those little businesses to develop so they can connect right into those sewer lines. It's what everybody would do, and basically if you went back about 100 feet on the road, when you build these CDI lands and when you do this industry that we're trying to create, then you're going to need these support businesses that are going to go in. And that line right along that main corridor of Vance Avenue is how you downzone those so that they can directly connect into the infrastructure just like you would any other subdivision in the country.
Questions?
Hey, Doug.
Well, so my name is Pete Jackson. I'm the manager of the California Record Company chip export facility. And I just wanted to reiterate, we really appreciate the efforts of Larry and the Harbor District promoting Humboldt and Humboldt Bay and trying to get the Corps here to spend some resources to keep the bay open. It's been challenging. As of last year, we lost probably 4 or 5 months when we couldn't do any deep drop vessels at all. So it's a big issue for us. And I really appreciate the efforts that Larry puts into getting these resources here and getting them spent in Humboldt Bay.
Any questions for Larry? Or just the accolades?
Accolades.
And he deserves those accolades. He's been preparing for this talk for 3 years now. So, good.
Really hard. It's great to hear enthusiasm for port activity, but if we bring in a ship in one and unload it, how are you going to get it to where it needs to go? How are you going to get the contents of the ship? Because Humboldt County can't absorb the contents of a ship coming from the Orient, for example, full of televisions and whatnot. So that means it's going to go someplace else in the state. How are you going to get it?
Well, in the first place, I look at like the wind energy in particular. What I'm seeing is, in the first place, we have to build the dock, and the companies that are going to build the dock, right, and get the infrastructure so that it's operational, will be the wind energy people. And with the wind energy people, it sort of is who's the first one in that does that. And the wind energy people, what they will be doing is they'll be bringing in the turbines by ship. They'll be bringing in the steel, everything that they do, they'll be bringing it in on ship. So that will be coming into the port, and then they'll be barging out the industry. And so then the question gets into is, as the port develops, and now you have a dock that you can use and ships can go in, then what are the other commodities that are going to come in and out of here? And then what are the other industries that we're going to attract? Because the first thing is we can't attract anybody because we don't have the facilities in order to do them. And so then the next question is, what do we need to do to diversify the port and to use this multi-purpose dock? Right now, my primary objective is to get it built in the first place.
I guess I'm still asking the question that if you're going to expand the activity in the port, you're going to need land transportation to support it, coming and going. All you got is Highway 101, and that isn't going to hold up with a whole lot of trucking.
Yeah.
What else are you going to do? How are you going to get it over to the Central Valley? 299?
Well, that's really is the core question is what are the commodities that we're looking at doing? Is that, are we doing, like San Diego as an example, they're not a container port, they're a large break bulk, and so huge items that basically come in on ship. And like with wind energy and other things, it's not dependent upon rail or other things. And so I'm not saying that we don't need a rail, but if you target industries that match up with your current infrastructure and you get it built, then over time, other infrastructure may grow to accommodate future development. And if you're looking, everything I've ever seen on the rail is basically, again, like three-legged stool, basically a hub, over by Reading, they would unload the commodities, then some sort of a rail or truck transport over here, and then you have the port. Without the port, you don't have anything. You don't have anything, So my goal is to rail.
You don't have a port, Larry.
Well, like I said, the wind energy doesn't need the rail. And so if you have the wind energy, I'm not saying that you wouldn't have the rail. Nobody's saying you wouldn't have the rail.
But that's only one project. When that's done, what do you do?
I don't know. And this is the question. Should we not do anything? That's really is the heart and soul of my question. Should we continue down the pathway that we're in and have been, which is essentially finding obstacles of why we can't do something and why we can't move forward. And I'm not saying they're not real obstacles, they're huge obstacles. But that's really the decision. Should we say, we don't have a rail, so therefore we can't move forward? And at this point, what we're saying is no, is that we have industry that wants to come here, wants to invest in our port, and that we should invest that, and then we should continue to look at other opportunities as they develop over time.
So you mentioned that the wind energy people will be ones who will be building the dock. So you own the property. So who owns the dock if it's built? The wind energy people? Would that be their exclusive property then, if they built it? Or do you guys own it, the harbor district?
Well, just as an example to answer your question specifically, the Fairhaven dock. We own the property. We have the tideland lease. They lease that from us. Fairhaven dock. Green Diamond. The Green Diamond dock. That's our property. We have a lease with Green Diamond. Down in Fields Landing, Murphy dock. That's our property. They lease it from us. That's our property. It'd be the exact same thing with this dock. Is that we would own the dock. We would lease it to them for an extended period of time. And when we put out the request for proposals earlier this year for that dock, we said up to 66 years is the lease term that we would do, because that's what's the statutory, in my understanding, is the statutory limit of that. And so it'd be the same as all the other docks on the bay. And pretty much the same as every other port in the state. There's a couple of docks that are owned by private individuals, but all the ones that I mentioned, the Harbor District controls the land through the state land commission lease, and then we have leases with those property owners.
How long does it take to build a dock?
It'll take a couple of years to build a dock, and really the key issue is going to be the seasonality. When you drive piles, is that in particular like the seals and the marine mammals and other things, so you really have to be careful with the timing of things, and if you don't get the timing just right, there's certain activities that you can do all year round, but there's other activities that you can only do during a certain time period, and so timing is critical on this, and that's why we need to get going now, because there's always these unexpected delays like environmental conditions and restrictions on timing and other kinds of things that are sure to happen within this process.
So back to the multi-purpose dock. Once this dock is built, it's very possible then that, say, if the rail does get funded and we do have the investors to move that forward, that they could then lease from the Harbor District access to the dock, or to run rail through the dock or to the dock. How would all that, be kept open if you guys were in charge of the leases?
Well, the lease hasn't been drafted. So what would typically happen is that there would be a port operator they would invest in the dock. It would be a public-private partnership. We would own it, and then they would be the port manager. They would be leasing it out as if it was a private sector project, and then all the taxes from the construction of that. If the Harbor District owns it, then it's basically the Harbor District's property is public infrastructure. If we lease it to somebody and then they do private investment, then those investments are basically taxable. Usually when you bring things across the dock, those are value-added taxes that go across the docks, and the county's going to want a piece of that. the pie. So the short answer is, we own the property, they lease it, they go and they market the port, they attract the tenants, they sign the lease with whoever, the railroad people and the other things, because they're the port operators, not the harbor district.
But in the instance of Green Diamond, they put, what, $6 million into renovating their property there to ship chips. So they're under no obligation. I mean, they've got very strict rules about what people can come onto the property, what they have to do when they're on their property. So they don't have to lease anything, or they don't have to be open, right?
I can answer that question. So we own 17 acres there, but the area out on the dock over the water is state lands. We lease the state land. Without leasing those state lands, we have no access to load vessels. We would still own the 17 acres, but we need the lease from the harbor district in order to load the vessels.
So you're only leasing the area in the water from harbor district?
Basically.
You actually own your own property?
Yep.
And just one last thing on this is that people ask us, like, that Redwood Marine Terminal 1 down there, why don't we just sell it? It's tideland property. We cannot sell state of California tideland property. We cannot sell it. Any tideland, we would have to, give it back to the state, and then the state would basically sell it, is what would happen if they wanted to dispose of that property. It's state land. Even though the land down at RMT1, how the harbor district originally acquired that, there was a settlement agreement, and it is actually tidelands, the portion that's down there that the harbor district owns. Not the Timber Heritage Association where you're at, that is upland. But the area that's right on the other side of the railroad tracks is state tidelands. We cannot sell that.
My guess, Marion, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, my guess is your concern is that the harbor district leases that property to one entity, that if the rail is built, you may not have access to that infrastructure?
That dock, yeah.
That's your concern. So Larry, I don't know if you can address that.
Well, it all depends on how the lease is structured. With Green Diamond and also the Fairhaven, there's not a mandate on that you have to have other people access the dock. With the Fairhaven, when we just renewed the Fairhaven lease dock, because that was just done in the last year, what we did is we exacted, or we had them dedicate to the harbor district, a public access easement, a right-of-way from basically Highway 299 that goes all the way to the dock. And so that way, if there were other users that wanted to do that, then we have a right-of-way through the Security Nationals property down there, so that in case they no longer wanted that lease, because the harbor district's perspective is, like, if you use Green Diamond as an example, they own that 17 acres. Without access through their property, the dock means nothing. If they don't want to use that dock and they give up that lease, we've got a dock, but we don't have any access to it. And so when we renewed the Security Nationals lease down at the Fairhaven dock, as part of the renewal, they granted us the right-of-way so that if in the future they gave up that lease, we could have access to that dock.
First Joe and then Bill.
Well, you said there's lots of room over there. Is there room to build another dock?
There's lots of room to build docks between. It's the question, do we need it? And in the future, we might need it because as part of the overarching strategy, I'd love to see the Fairhaven dock, get fully active. The Steiner dock fully active, the Gwinnett dock fully active, the RMT1 or RMT2. We've got all these docks that I'd love to get active and get more shipping on there. But there are additional spaces that we could build new docks.
Bill.
In your use of the 600 to 800 acres of potential industrial development on the Samoa Peninsula and the construction of your multi-purpose dock, are you going to accommodate the potential need for rail lines running south of the multi-purpose dock from north of here? Coming from down the Samoa Peninsula and using the wharfage that could be built along the Samoa Peninsula is about 5 miles and maybe 6,000 or 7,000 feet of wharfage that could be constructed along the bay, south of the multi-purpose dock that you're talking about. Are you gonna, making the plans for the multi-purpose dock, are you, and the construction of wind turbines on the land, are you going to plan ahead to accommodate the maybe 2 or 4 rail lines going south of the multi-purpose dock?
I guess the short answer is, a couple of answers is yes, we're about ready to transfer the Timber Heritage property, right? Associated with the Timber Heritage property, basically they asked us to grant them an easement that would go from, essentially from the Redwood Marine Terminal 2 back to the main line with that. And that was that's one of the terms that we included in there, which would basically accommodate additional development from the industrial corridor. And so that will likely happen within the next month. And then the second thing that we asked for was, we'd asked the railroad, North Coast Railroad Authority, basically that the area from the Samoa Bridge, through the coastal dependent industrial is critical. We need to keep that. There's no question about it. We need to keep that. Even if you have a rail, they always need like short rail tracks in case you need to move stuff internally within the port. And then the second reason, there's no reason for a trail to go right down the heart of the coastal dependent industrial. We do not want people walking through the middle of your log deck, trucks, big heavy things. You can't, that's not a good place for a trail. We'd rather have them up against the beach and other locations. We need to protect that track. The first thing is that's the position. Whether you could go south of that or anything else, our priority at this point is trying to protect the rail corridor and the right-of-ways within the Samoa Peninsula, because to us, that really is a no-brainer. I don't have control over what the legislature does.
But how many rail lines can go past the multi-purpose dock through it?
I don't know.
Will that be one of the considerations to preserve that potential for having container trains hauling lots of cargo up and down the peninsula?
Well, the Harbor District we own it fee title right now. Basically from, down here to the bridge, we own the rail corridor. Everything on the side of the rail corridor, the North Coast Railroad Authority has the right of way. And so if there's additional land that's needed, the Harbor District currently owns that. And we have no plans for developing the width of the rail where the railroad track is. So I don't see anything
preserve
that
the potential use of that Harbor District land for additional tracks.
Well, that's what we've said, is that we're about ready to grant an easement to the Timber Heritage Association for what you're talking about.
I'm talking about the potential container railroad.
I mean, it's a railroad. I don't care what you use it for. It's a rail line. They can use it for a rail line. It doesn't say you could use it for, it's a rail. And whatever they put on the rail is right.
I think he's asking is there multi-track availability through that easement to have the right-of-way wide enough to accommodate two-way track, two sets of track. And
I haven't looked at that honestly. I think quite frankly, I think the bottlenecks are unequivocally is Manila. You go right through Manila. The properties that are right there is a huge bottleneck for tracks. And then the second, the bridge crossings at the Matter of the Bridge and along the Eureka corridor. Those are the bottlenecks. The property that we have in here, I don't see that as a bottleneck. We own all that property.
there is an easement that goes through the town of Samoa southward, and you have your negotiations with Security National help preserve your intent with that access to the dock by negotiations of how it will be positioned in the future. But I think the question is, how much room is there for multi-tracks? And the answer is, I don't know at this point, I guess.
I mean, you could again, from the bridge to the end of the Samoa Peninsula, there was a maritime transportation study, Lake Associates did it, I think it was in like 2014 or something like that. They did 10% drawings, including the rail corridor and all those things. It's included within the study that the Harbor District did. Not only the roads and the other things, where the right-of-ways that are needed to be acquired, all those things, and also laid out the rail corridor. I just don't know if they put in 1 line or 2 lines or 4 lines. I don't know that detail.
And there is the possibility, since Timber Heritage has access to the main line, that may be an avenue for a second line into the dock area. I'm just posing that as a possibility. There's a lot of regulatory things that come into play here.
Can you comment on the status? I mean, I've learned some information regarding the effort by the county planning department to change some of the coastal dependent industrial zoning. Have you been informed as to what their position is now after having been advised by the coastal commission?
I haven't seen anything recent. As of last year, I was involved in it. I haven't seen any new activity.
The reason I bring that up is that about 2 months ago, I called Michael Richardson in the planning department and asked him, where do things stand? Where's your report? And I was very, very pleased to hear that they've kind of put it on hold or put it on the shelf where they are now. They're not going to do anything more. This is what he told me. Because, and I asked him why. He said, well, the Coastal Commission didn't want to affect, I concluded this is what he was saying. The Coastal Commission staff did not want to make any changes in the zoning of coastal dependent industrial zone on the Samoa Peninsula. So they kind of put a stop to that effort to remove things from CDI. And I was very pleased, and I think everybody here should be pleased too. So thank you for your testimony last year.
Everything that I outlined, the businesses that I've outlined are coastal dependent or coastal related industries. And so, how do you become a port of regional or national significance? You have coastal dependent or coastal related industries. And so, that's been really the goal of the Harbor District. In the end, that's our primary mission, is to revitalize the port. And so we're looking to attract those kinds of industries to the Bay. I think it's exceedingly important that we have the interim use language that they have has been absolutely critical for the Harbor District, and I strongly support that. But that says no more than 25% at any one time could be interim uses, and so it hasn't been a problem at this point. And then if there is a coastal dependent industry that needs that space, then the leases, all the leases that we have at Redwood Marine Terminal 2, they include a clause, and the Security National as well, that if the CDI comes in and needs that land, then they have to give up that lease within a reasonable time period. That's a condition of approval.
Lisa, what?
Yeah, I think I need to clarify. I think.
Stand up.
Oh,
Talk loud. Soft.
I think I just need to clarify. We have not shelved the potential rezoning of our coastal dependent industrial lands. We're behind. We are still working on it, and in fact, I've just turned my attention back to it this week. We have not, at this point, made any recommendations, and so we're just going through some analysis with input we've had from property owners, and what we know of the Coastal Commission concerns, and we will be coming forward with a recommendation. That's not to say we're going to recommend that nothing come out. We're not saying that everything's going to come out. We don't know at this point. So I just, maybe there's a little misunderstanding, but it's not been shelved. It was just sort of set aside for a while because we've been working on sea level rise and other things that we are still working on with the Humboldt Bay plan update. So,
Where are you on sea level rise also?
we just finished, and we'll be posting onto our website some information that was generated in regard to Fairhaven, Finntown area, and King Salmon Fields Landing area, what we consider to be the communities at risk on the bay. So that information will be posted, some ideas of what could be done to address sea level rise in those communities. We're in the process of developing sea level rise policies, and we are likely going to have a workshop, and then eventually that will be going forward to planning commission hearings. So anyway, we're moving along. The whole Berry Plan update is a giant animal. It's just taking lots of moving pieces, and we're moving forward with it.
Are you addressing dredge spoils, reutilization?
Yes,
In that?
yes, yes.
So I guess in conclusion is, the one thing that I completely overlooked and I think is absolutely vitally important is that we absolutely positively need to improve our facilities for commercial fishermen. That is absolutely critical, and in the Harbor District's perspective, we'd like to consolidate those as much as we possibly can on Woodley Island, because that's where most of our services are, and other places as well. But we've got to look at the commercial fishermen, in particular the impacts on the fiber optic, and also the offshore wind energy. We have to strengthen our commercial fishermen. The last thing is that when, what I've experienced is, I go to a cocktail party and people talk, we're sitting around the table with some friends. Basically, people often talk about all the negative stuff in Humboldt County. In my mind, what I like, the message that I'm trying to give is when you're at a cocktail party, wow, look at these great things that are happening in Humboldt. I think we might actually do this. And positive energy, positive, we're going to pull this off. But it all starts with us admitting to ourselves that, number one, that we want it to happen and that we have the wherewithal to pull it off. So thank you very much.
That's great, and Larry's background with the city of Arcata really shows in the talk today and the leadership that he's shown for the Harbor District. A couple of things that are coming up that I want you to know about. One is Timber Heritage on Saturday, the